Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, May 12, 2022. President Joe Biden orders flags at the White House and government buildings lowered to remember the 1 million U.S. deaths in the coronavirus pandemic. The president saying each is an irreplaceable loss. As a nation, we must not grow numb to such sorrow. Senate confirming Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to a second four-year term. President Biden meeting with the manufacturers of infant formula and retailers discussing the nationwide shortage as Republicans in Congress criticize what they say is White House inaction to address this issue. House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol issues subpoenas to 5 Republican members of Congress who have not cooperated with the probe and who the Democratic chair of the committee says have information about the attacks and events leading up to it. And the White House press secretary, days away from leaving her position, reflecting on her time as the chief administration spokesperson. ABC News article begins, what was once unthinkable is now a reality. 1 million Americans have now died from the coronavirus, according to an announcement made Thursday by President Joe Biden, marking a long-dreaded milestone for an incomprehensible tragedy. President speaking today to the global COVID-19 summit.
Today, we mark a tragic milestone here in the United States. 1 million COVID deaths, 1 million empty chairs around the family dinner table. Each irreplaceable losses. Each leaving behind a family, a community, forever changed because of this pandemic. My heart goes out to all of those who are struggling, asking themselves, how do I go on without him? How do I go on without her? What will we do without him? It's grief shared by people across all of our nations. Around the world, many more millions have died. Millions of children have been orphaned, and with thousands still dying every day, now is the time for us to act, all of us together. We all must do more. We must honor those we have lost by doing everything we can to prevent as many deaths as possible. Today, we're at a new stage in fighting this pandemic, facing an evolving set of challenges. We have to double down on our efforts to get shots in people's arms, country by country, community by community. Ensure we have reliable and predictable supplies of vaccines and boosters for everyone, everywhere. Expand access globally to tests and treatments. And we have to prevent complacency.
President Biden in pre-recorded remarks to the second global COVID-19 summit, a virtual event that brings together, according to the White House, heads of state and world leaders from international organizations, the private sector, philanthropies, non-government organizations, and other partners. On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi opening her weekly news conference, also remembering those lost to COVID and the milestone hit.
Not such a good morning in that today on the steps of the Capitol, we will be observing the 1 millionth death from COVID. My understanding is the president is lowering flags at half-staff. We will have, sadly, our regular coming together in prayer and song. 1 million people have died. It's such a terrible toll. And when you think of what it means in the lives of those families. So we send, of course, our condolences to the families, the children, the siblings, the friends, the colleagues, the spouses of those lost. The heartbreak continues. All the more reason why we must pass the COVID legislation so we can purchase vaccines, provide testing and treatments to prevent the outbreak from various other variants that may come along and deaths.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. More on the 1 million COVID-19 deaths in the United States. We're joined on the phone by Myah Ward, reporter with Politico. Thank you for being on Washington Today. The title of your article at Politico Nightly, 1 million deaths was a choice. Where did that come from?
So that really was inspired by what Dr. Peter Hotez, a familiar face of, pandemic pundit throughout this, COVID crisis. He was talking about the fact that after May 1st, 2021, when the White House announced there are vaccines available for everyone in the U.S. who wants one. He was talking about all the deaths that came after that point, the 200 to 300,000 Americans who died from the virus who decided not to get vaccinated. And so to him, he thinks we're not, spending enough time talking about those lives that were lost, the ones who chose to not get vaccinated.
And what does that bode for the future then?
I mean, I think there's a lot of concern that this isn't the end. We're projecting another 100 million COVID cases this fall. And I think the concern is that there are a lot of people who are not going to get vaccinated. Alongside that, the people who have been vaccinated are going to continue to spread the virus because our immunity is waning and these other variants are continuing to pop up. And so we're going to have this, seasonal virus continue to attack our country.
1 million deaths. It's a very big number. The White House is recognizing it. There's been a moment of silence in the U.S. House. But it doesn't seem like across the country it's a big deal. Where is the country now on this?
I asked Dr. Hotez about this, why it feels like this number isn't resonating. And there are other big stories right now. We have, the news about the draft opinion with Roe versus Wade. We have the war in Ukraine. There are other things. There's inflation that's, plaguing American households. So, I mean, people are turning their attention to other things, but the concern right now is that enough attention is not being placed on this because it is still going to be something that we're facing. It's been years of this pandemic now, and so people are losing interest, but the reality that, Dr. Hotez is trying to drive home is that this isn't over.
President Biden has requested some emergency funding for COVID programs, still pending before Congress. What's the timeline for voting?
I mean, I think that the concern right now is, I mentioned this projection that millions of Americans are going to get sick this summer, fall, winter. And so this money is running out. And so what Dr. Hotez was pointing out is that these mRNA boosters that many of us have, they're not holding up as well as we were hoping. So, there's going to need to be money for better technology, development, making vaccines free, making sure people have access to tests, all of these things that treatments like Paxlovid, all of these things that we're saying are so important to combat this pandemic, they're not going to be as accessible as they have been. And so you have millions of people getting affected. You don't have these resources available. This could be a very big issue in the coming months and year.
Myah Ward is a reporter with Politico. Find her work at Politico.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Rand Paul today tried to pass a resolution to lift vaccine and mask mandates for Senate pages, who are the teenagers who work in and learn about the Senate, delivering messages and legislative documents and generally helping out. Senator Paul saying on the Senate floor the medical evidence shows these mandates are not effective and actually may be harmful.
From day one, our country's response to this pandemic has made the comfortable more comfortable, while the working class or kids or people with no power have to keep on working but have to obey rules that the adults don't have for themselves. Now in the halls of Congress, we have created a privileged class that can choose whether to get vaccinated and an underclass that has to abide by dictate. It makes absolutely no sense to mandate COVID vaccinations for teenagers who are healthy. It makes even less sense to mandate a booster. There is no scientific evidence that boosters are valuable, and there is scientific evidence that boosters increase the risk of a heart inflammation for young adolescent males.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. At the end of his speech, he did ask unanimous consent to pass his resolution to lift the vaccine and mask requirements for Senate pages. It was objected to by the leaders of the Senate Rules and Administration Committee, both the chair, Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, and Roy Blunt, the ranking Republican from Missouri. U.S. Senate today voting to confirm Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to a second four-year term. Vote was 80-19. The Wall Street Journal reports that President Biden said last fall he would reappoint Mr. Powell, opting for continuity as the scale of the central bank's challenges in controlling inflation was becoming more evident. Mr. Powell, 69 years old, was tapped by President Donald Trump in 2018 to lead the central bank, 6 years after he won an appointment from President Barack Obama to the Board of Governors. On the Senate floor today, Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat from Ohio, chair of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. He spoke not only about the Powell nomination, but referenced other Federal Reserve Board member nominations the Senate has approved this week.
Today we'll vote on Jerome Powell, who's earned the opportunity to lead the Fed as chair for another term. He's been a steadfast defender of the Federal Reserve's independence, resisting unprecedented attacks by former President Trump to politicize the Fed, and I know he'll similarly resist those in Congress who see inflation not as a burden on American families, but it's a chance to blame the President of the United States for something that is complex, due chiefly to things that happened before he was president, and mainly to corporate greed and global events.
Senator Sherrod Brown chaired the Banking Committee before today's vote to confirm Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to that second term. He has been acting chair since his first term expired in February. Now he'll be chair again until February 2026 with this vote. Of the 19 votes against Powell, there were 80 in favor. Of the 19 against, there were 13 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and the one independent, Bernie Sanders, who caucuses with the Democrats. One senator not voting, Republican Pat Toomey. One of the no votes, Republican Richard Shelby of Alabama, tweeting, "Today I voted no on the reconfirmation of Jay Powell to be chair of the Federal Reserve. American families are facing rampant inflation and historically high prices. Powell and the rest of the Fed have failed the American people. We should not reward failure." Another no vote was Bob Menendez, Democrat from New Jersey. He put out a statement explaining that it was to protest that in selecting the heads of the Boston and Dallas Federal Reserve banks this year, quote, Federal Reserve opted to continue the shameful 108-year legacy of Latinos being left out of the Federal Reserve's leadership. This from Reuters. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said she believes the Federal Reserve can bring down inflation without causing a recession because of a strong U.S. job market and household balance sheets, low debt costs, and a strong banking sector. She told the House Representatives Financial Services Committee that all of those things suggest the Fed has a path to bring down inflation without causing a recession, and I know it will be their objective to try to accomplish that. During the hearing, covered by C-SPAN, she was asked about inflation and Biden administration policies by Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican of Missouri.
During a public address on Tuesday, President Biden attempted to once again blame record-high inflation on the pandemic and Putin. Secretary Yellen, is it still your belief that excessive government spending, trillions of taxpayer dollars, is not a root cause of the rising prices that my constituents in Missouri's 2nd Congressional District are seeing for every single day on gas, goods, groceries? I could go on and on. Is it not a root cause?
Look, there are many contributors to the exceptionally high inflation that we're experiencing. And certainly,
is excessive government spending a root cause?
Look, we had substantial programs to address what I believe was the most significant risk we faced as an economy at the time. Unemployment was extremely high.
It has now spun us into an inflation that is a 40-year high, goods and services that are not affordable in any way, shape, or form. We've literally had the CPI down for one quarter. God help us if it's down for a second one. Could toss us into a recession, supply chain issues. I could go on and on. Look, we have spent trillions and trillions of dollars, and the Fed has been too late to get here to help. Is the excessive spending a root cause?
Well, look, inflation is a matter of demand and supply. And
Okay,
it's
let me-
certainly true that government programs supported demand.
Ma'am,
But
let me just reclaim my time.
Pandemic.
Let me just reclaim my time here, please, and since we'll move on since you won't answer the question. The ranking member asked also about inflation and asked what you and the administration are doing about it. And you assured us it's all hands on deck and you're doing all sorts of things. You identified that, in fact, there's a problem with inflation, but what are you doing? What are you and the president specifically doing? All you said was you were releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which does nothing to help and actually jeopardizes our future petroleum needs when there really is an emergency. What are you doing specifically?
Well, it's the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has served to hold down oil prices.
No, it
above
hasn't.
I'm sorry, but it has.
It's $4.50 a gallon, and diesel's well over $5. It's a drop in the bucket. What are you doing specifically? You said it's all hands on deck.
Well, Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has had a substantial impact
Oh, for
on
heaven's
global
sakes.
energy.
We've
and
been at
food
this for
markets.
16 months, Madam Secretary. I mean, with all due respect, I can't disagree more. You won't even admit that the root cause of this is the spending and spending and spending. The Fed just got on the job last month in terms of, raising by 50 basis points. We'll do it again next month, and perhaps the month after, and the month after. We are in a spiral.
Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, questioning the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen during today's House Financial Services Committee hearing, the second of two hearings this week for Secretary Yellen, the other before the Senate Banking Committee, both on the annual report of the FSOC, Financial Stability Oversight Council, which is comprised of Yellen, Fed Chair Powell, and the heads of federal financial regulatory agencies. Bureau of Labor Statistics today saying that the Producer Price Index, another key indicator of inflation, rose at a slower pace in April than in March compared to a year ago, 11% versus 11.5%. The PPI looks at how much manufacturers get for products at their initial sale. Wall Street today, the Dow down 103, S&P down 5, NASDAQ up 6. From the Wall Street Journal, baby formula manufacturers and retailers say they are working to address a long-running shortage in products on store shelves, but the hardships facing U.S. families may take months to abate. Many retail chains are continuing to ration supplies by placing strict limits on orders, while others are trying to find substitutes with little success. Meanwhile, everyone from frustrated parents to lawmakers on Capitol Hill have called for inquiries into why shortages that initially emerged earlier in the COVID-19 pandemic have been difficult to resolve. That from the Wall Street Journal. Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers of Washington State, a Republican, speaking at a news conference today outside the U.S. Capitol building.
Moms, support groups, nurses have been telling me that this is the biggest crisis that they have faced as they face the shortage of baby formula. Families are turning to the internet because they are so desperate. It is extremely dangerous. You think about moms going to the grocery store and having an empty shelf. In some cases, they're driving for hours in order to get the baby formula that they need. And they certainly don't need to be facing empty shelves. We shouldn't be rationing formula to keep their babies fed. And some families, they rely upon specific formula. I talked to one mom who has a baby with allergies, and it's extremely difficult. She feels like she's playing Russian roulette as she goes to the store. President Biden and the FDA must do more. This is a matter of life or death. What will it take for the Biden administration to reverse its inflation, supply chain, and energy crises that are making the shortage worse? On the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as with my colleagues in the conference, we are asking the questions. We've been raising the alarm to President Biden for months. We've been seeing the empty shelves. We've been seeing the rising cost on families. We also have concerns about the Abbott recall and how it is impacting shortages. On behalf of every parent and caregiver who is unsure as to whether they'll be able to feed their children, we need answers and we need accountability. I want to thank our conference chair, Elise, as well as Ashley Henson, everyone who is here representing parents and grandparents. I'm a mom of 3 kids, We will not stop until this shortage is fixed.
Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers from Washington State, a Republican news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building today, along with other House Republicans. She is the ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and the chair of that committee, Democrat Frank Pallone, has announced a hearing on this issue of infant formula shortages for May 25th. President Biden, according to the White House, meeting today with retailers and formula manufacturers on efforts to increase supplies, and the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki got a question right off the top of her briefing on this.
On the baby formula, Abbott says once the FDA gives them notice, it'll take them 2 weeks to restart the site, and then an additional 6 to 8 weeks to get formula on the shelves. With what the president heard today, does he believe that we'll have the tools to bridge what could be a 2-month plus shortage?
Well, I would say that the president is going to continue to use every tool we have in order to bridge that gap. And this has been work that has been underway for weeks and months now. We know that if they get approval, obviously, as you noted, it will take them some time to get up and running again. So what we need to do, and what you've seen the president announce earlier today, and I just reiterated, is steps we can take from here to increase supply, make sure it's on the shelves. That includes increasing imports. It also includes ensuring we're working with retailers, as the president did during his calls, to make sure that shelves are stocked. It also includes ensuring that lower income families can access different brands of baby formula by working through with the WIC for the exemptions for the WIC program. So we recognize that this is certainly a challenge for people across the country, something the president is very focused on, and we're going to do everything we can to cut red tape and take steps to increase supply on the marketplace.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. Another paragraph from the Wall Street Journal article. The FDA said that overall the nation's infant formula manufacturers are making enough to meet demand even without Abbott's main factory online. The industry sold more formula in April than it did the month before Abbott's recall, the FDA said. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Book TV, every Sunday on C-SPAN 2, features leading authors discussing their latest nonfiction books. At 2 p.m. Eastern, in his book Dragon Slayers, Larry Schweiker, professor of history at the University of Dayton, talks about 6 presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Grover Cleveland, Theodore Roosevelt, JFK, Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump, who he says took on the Washington swamp after taking office. And at 10 p.m. Eastern on Afterwards, Forbes media chairman Steve Forbes shares his thoughts on what's causing inflation in the U.S. and how to fix it. He's interviewed by New York Times economic reporter Gina Smilik. Watch Book TV every Sunday on C-SPAN 2 and find a full schedule on your program guide or watch online anytime at booktv.org.
Welcome back to Washington Today. From the Washington Post, a story: the committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol by a pro-Trump mob has subpoenaed 5 Republican members of Congress, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, after they refused to cooperate with the panel's inquiry. Congressman Benny Thompson, who chairs the Select Committee, said Thursday that the panel has subpoenaed McCarthy and Congressman Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Scott Perry, and Jim Jordan. Reporters caught up with Congressman McCarthy today.
I have not seen the subpoena. I guess they sent it to you guys before they sent it to me. Look, my view on the committee has not changed. They're not conducting a legitimate investigation. It seems as though they just want to go after their political opponents. But the one thing that has changed in America, higher inflation that we haven't seen since the 70s, unsecure border, gas prices, and now we don't have baby formula.
So will you comply?
What does this mean for the future? What does this mean for the future of the House?
Are you going to comply with the subpoena?
Reporters following Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, in the hallways, the U.S. Capitol building. Back to the Washington Post story: the subpoenas of Congressman McCarthy and the 4 other House Republicans quote, marks a significant escalation in the committee's efforts to obtain information related to the lawmakers' communications with then President Donald Trump and White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows before, during, and after the attack. One of the Democrats on the House Select Committee investigating the attack, Zoe Lofgren of California, was interviewed on MSNBC this afternoon.
We have interviewed over 1,000 people. We've got over 100,000 documents. We have a lot of information that leads to certain conclusions. But these members were in the meetings. They were the ones that had the conversations. We want them to come in and tell what they know. This is a great opportunity for them to do that. And now it's a legal obligation for them to do that.
When you look at all the people that the committee's had access to, Donald Trump Jr., Kimberly Guilfoyle, Ivanka Trump, Jared, Kayleigh McEnany, Bernie Kerik. I know there's a dance going on with Rudy Giuliani. Are there private conversations? I mean, is there any collegiality left in sort of the body to have private conversations to say, hey, why rack up the legal bills? I mean, Don Jr. came in. Why not you? I mean, is there a behind-the-scenes effort that is like, you know, hey, you know, Kevin in the gym or something? I mean, are there conversations we don't see where you try to
go into the men's gym?
Sorry. Fair. In the dining room, or, you know, like, is there anything that happens that isn't so nasty where you just say to them, like, come on, you know, we all know that you were on the phone. Jim Jordan told a reporter in Ohio, he talked to him umpteen times. I mean, is there any private discussions with them? Like, come on, or are they just so paralyzed by fear of Trump?
Well, I don't want to categorize what's motivating them. There is communication among members on business. For example, I'm on the Judiciary Committee. We were in markups of bills all day long, until almost midnight last night, and Jim Jordan was there, and we discussed various matters, but we did not discuss this. Of course, he didn't receive the subpoena until today. I would hope that they will come forward. And, you know, when we became members of Congress, we took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that implicates a lot of things, but one thing that comes with that is being part of a law and order body, making sure that we do what's necessary to uphold the law. And even though I have big disagreements with these members on policy issues, I wouldn't want to assume that they will, because we disagree on issue X or Y, that they'll simply defy their legal obligations and refuse to come in. I expect them to come in.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, Democrat from California, senior member of the House Select Committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Again, those 5 Republicans getting subpoenas today: the Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California, Mo Brooks of Alabama, Andy Biggs of Arizona, Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, and Jim Jordan from Ohio. Congressman McCarthy today also at the National Peace Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. for National Police Week. The memorial has over 23,000 names of fallen officers. This year, over 600 new names being added to the roll call of heroes. Joining Congressman McCarthy, some other members of Congress, including John Rutherford, Republican of Florida, who is a former sheriff.
You know, as a former sheriff, I can tell you I've seen way too many brave men and women's names go up on these walls. And as we honor law enforcement this week, we remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice for their individual communities. Sadly, police killings, especially ambush killings, are on the rise. There were 71 officers killed in 2021. That's a 59% increase. A law enforcement officer is killed in America almost every 5 days. So what this morning is about and what this week is about is promises made and promises kept. These men and women, when they first pinned on their badge, they were promised that if you go into that breach between the bad guys and the community you serve, and you pay that ultimate sacrifice, you will never be forgotten. That's the promise. Because a man is not dead until he's forgotten. So today is about promises made and promises kept. And I thank all of you for being here to help us keep that promise. God bless.
Congressman John Rutherford, Republican from Florida. He was an officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office before serving as the Duval County Sheriff 2003 through 2015. Another member of Congress from Florida, Democrat Val Demings, spent 27 years with the Orlando Police Department, rising from officer to police chief 2007 through 11. Val Demings speaking on the House floor today about National Police Week.
Last year in my home state of Florida, we lost 51 law enforcement officers. I pause to honor them today. I was sworn in as a police officer in 1984. I shall never forget my oath or the indescribable feeling of being a police officer. Police officers do it all. They coach Little League baseball, football, basketball. They deliver meals to seniors, mentor teens, and buy teddy bears for abused and neglected children. But we also know they run to murders, rapes, robberies, burglaries, other vicious assaults, including domestic violence calls. They respond without hesitation, hoping and praying for a peaceful resolution, but never really knowing what the outcome will be. This year, 617 new names will be added to the memorial wall. Fallen officers who lost their lives through violence, crashes, assaults. 439 lost their lives to COVID-19 while doing everything they could to protect and serve their communities. Representing Central Florida, I want to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to remember my brother, Orange County Deputy First Class, Craig Sejos. Every day, Deputy Sejos went to work, making a difference, serving the Orange County Sheriff's Office and the citizens of Orange County, Florida, for 30 years. He is gone, but will never be forgotten.
Congresswoman Val Demings, former police chief of Orlando, Florida, on the House floor. Craig Sejos died last year due to complications from COVID-19. It was former President John F. Kennedy who first proclaimed May 15th as National Peace Officers Memorial Day. That was in 1962. U.S. Senate ending its work week without approving an additional $40 billion for military and economic aid to Ukraine to help in the war against Russia. The holdup, Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, who wants to include in the bill an inspector general to oversee the spending. Both the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell offering to have a vote on Senator Paul's amendment with a 60-vote threshold in order to pass it. But Paul objecting to that, he wants it in the bill. Here is Senator Schumer and Senator Paul on the Senate floor. First, Senator Paul.
With a $30 trillion debt, America can't afford to be the world's policeman. The U.S. is trying to recover from the $1.6 trillion we spent on wars in the Middle East, not to mention the $5 trillion borrowed for COVID. We should not forget that the Soviet Union collapsed in large part, not because it was defeated militarily, but because it ran out of money. In an attempt to save Ukraine, will we doom the United States to such a future? In the past 2 years, the U.S. has borrowed more money than at any time in our history. We are already experiencing the greatest rate of inflation in over 4 decades. The assault on monetary discipline is untenable, and it cannot go on forever. Unless we put an end to the fiscal insanity, a day of reckoning awaits us. Congress should evaluate the cost of continuing down this path. The biggest threat to the United States today is debt and inflation and the destruction of the dollar. We cannot save Ukraine by killing our economic strength. So I act to modify the bill to allow for a special inspector general. This would be the inspector general that's been overseeing the waste in Afghanistan and has done a great job. So therefore, I ask the senator to modify his request so that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 368 H.R. 7691. Furthermore, that the Powell amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time, and the Senate vote on passage of the bill as amended with a 60 affirmative vote threshold for passage.
Does the leader so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object. It's clear from the junior senator from Kentucky's remarks he doesn't want to aid Ukraine. That is not the case for the overwhelming majority here. Again, all he will accomplish with his actions here today is to delay that aid, not to stop it. It's aid desperately needed by a valiant people fighting against authoritarianism and defending democracy. So I will not modify.
Is there an objection to the original request?
I object.
From the Senate floor, Senator Rand Paul objecting, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York. You did not hear, but he was on the floor, Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, the minority leader. The House voted Tuesday to approve the $40 billion additional aid for Ukraine that the Senate is still working on. The vote in the House, 368 to 57. A spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov, saying that Finland joining NATO would threaten Russian security, and in general, NATO expansion does not make the world more stable and secure. The leaders of Finland saying today they want to quickly apply for NATO membership, and the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg telling Newsweek that he'll promise it will be a smooth and swift process. Sweden also discussing NATO membership lately, all in response to Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. In Washington, D.C., the Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Karen Donfried, telling the Senate Foreign Relations Committee the U.S. would welcome both Finland and Sweden to the alliance.
The administration strongly supports NATO's open door policy, and in fact, a principle that we are defending in Russia's war against Ukraine is the right of every sovereign country to make its own decisions about its security and foreign policy. So I think this issue is fundamental in this conflict. And in the case of Finland and Sweden, these obviously are very close and valued defense partners of the United States. As you know, they already have a relationship to NATO. They're both key EU allies. And I am so struck in reflecting on where Finland and Sweden are today in terms of their relationship with NATO, that this is another piece of the mounting evidence of what a strategic failure Putin is suffering today. You know, if we take Finland, if we think about how carefully Finland has managed its relationship with Russia over time. Finland has an 830-mile border with Russia. And if you had asked me at my confirmation hearing, do you think Finland and Sweden will apply for NATO membership during your 10 years as Assistant Secretary? I would have said no. But we saw Finland move immediately after Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24 because it changed the security situation fundamentally. So I am struck by how so much of what Putin says he was seeking to avoid, he has brought about. And I think Finland and Sweden's interest in NATO is a key example of that.
Karen Donfried, Assistant U.S. Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today. Some Associated Press analysis. While Finland's parliament still has to weigh in, the announcement today means Finland is all but certain to apply and gain admission through the process, though the process could take months to complete. Sweden, likewise, considering putting itself under NATO's protection. That would represent a major change in Europe's security landscape. Sweden has avoided military alliances for more than 200 years, while Finland adopted neutrality after its defeat by the Soviets in World War II. The Times of Israel has a story. The Palestinian Authority said on Thursday it had refused Israel's request to conduct a joint investigation into the death of Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. 51 years old, she was shot in the head during clashes between Israeli troops and Palestinian gunmen while covering an Israeli army operation in the West Bank city of Jenin on Wednesday. The Palestinians blamed Israel for her death, while Israeli officials and Palestinian gunmen said Palestinian gunmen may have fired the fatal shot. At a state funeral today in Ramallah in the West Bank, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas promising to hold Israel accountable in the ICC, International Criminal Court.
This crime is not the first of its kind. Tens of Palestinian journalists have fallen before Shireen. We hold the Israeli occupying forces fully accountable for her killing. We will not let them hide behind their crime and will not let it go unpunished. We rejected and continue to reject the joint investigation with the Israeli occupation authorities because they committed the crime and we do not trust them. We will go immediately to the International Criminal Court to track down the killers.
Through an interpreter, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas at the funeral today. The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price saying Wednesday, when the news of the death spread around the world, that the U.S. wants an investigation.
Shireen was a veteran reporter. She was followed closely by those who care about the region and is mourned by all who knew her. The Secretary spoke just 1 week ago on World Press Freedom Day about the fundamental role journalists play in the free flow of information, ideas, opinions, including dissenting ones, as being essential to inclusive and tolerant societies. It is heart-wrenching to see the killing of another journalist just 1 week later. We call for an immediate and thorough investigation and full accountability. Investigating attacks on independent media and prosecuting those responsible are of paramount importance. We will continue to promote media freedom and protect journalists' ability to do their jobs without fear of violence, threats to their lives or safety, or unjust detention. Her death is a tragic loss and an affront to media freedom everywhere.
The State Department spokesman Ned Price. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki reflecting today about her year and almost 4 months as the chief spokesperson for the Biden administration. She's leaving at the end of this week to be replaced by the current Deputy White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. Jen Psaki sitting down with reporters at a breakfast put together by the Christian Science Monitor.
Michael Collins from USA Today.
Thanks. Jen, you came into the job with quite a bit of government experience, so you had a pretty good idea of what you were getting into. But looking back, I'm wondering, was there any particular part of the job that now you realize that you were totally unprepared for it?
That is a good question. This is a very funny thing to say. I've worked more in the White House than anywhere else in my career, which is a very, as I'm preparing to walk out of the building, it's very, so I recognize how fortunate I am. But to kind of go to your question, I knew and I had a sense of what the flow of the briefing would be, what information would be needed. And I knew, and I was relatively new to the Biden orbit. I mean, as many of you have covered him know, I mean, he just had people working for him, which is a credit to him and the First Lady for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, right? And so I knew that developing that relationship with him would be hugely important. I don't know that this was a massive surprise to me as much as it was something that became even more relevant in this particular job. It took me a little bit of time to recognize that sometimes you just have to lay out and be transparent about how difficult the problem is you're facing and how difficult the options are. And you don't always have a good talking point or a good spin. It is sometimes acknowledging this is very difficult, and let me explain to you, we either can do this or we can do this. They're both imperfect and faulted. And I think it took me a couple of months to recognize that that was maybe part of my job too. Everything is not rosy. Everything is not going to turn out perfectly. Everything is not without risk consequences. So that is a piece that it took me some time. I had seen with former President Obama from working for him for so long, also just the difficulty of decision making and how that weighs on people. And when you have these jobs, you do have an up-close seat, of course, to important meetings and decisions and moments, but also to how that weighs on the shoulders of leaders and the difficulty of making those decisions and their humanity too, and I don't know if that shocked me, but because I had witnessed it in some way before, but the weight of what President Biden is facing is in many ways different from what was the end of the former President Obama's last term when I was the communications director, in just COVID and the economy and withdrawal from Afghanistan and Ukraine and a lot of unknowns when you follow a former president, especially one like Trump. So just seeing the fact up close of how difficult and how there's not one good silver bullet answer. It's sobering in a lot of ways, right? Because sometimes you think Maybe there's another room where the meeting is happening, and then you're like, no, I'm in the meeting, and the meeting's happening in this room, and here's where we're making a decision. And that's been probably one of the most valuable parts, but different maybe than I would have kind of laid it out in my mind.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki at today's Christian Science Monitor breakfast with reporters. Her last week on the job, according to news reports, her next stop will be host and analyst on cable news network MSNBC. Thanks for listening to Washington Today, which is available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. And for more top Washington stories delivered to you each day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.